Hello, Martin.
Hey, how you doing, Steve?
Good. Very good. So, this is on my YouTube channel. Therefore, people know who I am. Who are you? Maybe you could make a brief personal sort of introduction.
Well, as you introduced, said on Google Plus, so let's start from the end and move backwards.
Okay.
I'm approximately the same age as you are,
Right.
and I share the same passion for languages that you do,
All right.
uh,
Good.
especially when it comes to learning them orally, learning to actually speak them.
Right.
What differentiates us from what we said last time is that you focus on vocabulary, and I just focus on jumping in and learning to use that
Right.
a very limited
Yeah.
pool of words.
Right.
But I started doing this when I was a kid and brought up in Brazil, and I was kind of thrust into Portuguese at the age of 6 in first grade.
But your family was not Portuguese speaking?
No, my parents are American, born in New York,
Mm-hmm.
in the New York area, and then we moved to the interior, the center of Brazil, the state of Goiás, when I was 6 years old.
Really?
At that time, Brasilia wasn't built yet, but we lived actually very near what would then become the new capital of Brasilia. So I was thrust into first grade, didn't know a word of Portuguese, and I had to kind of learn, as a child would learn, a new language.
How long did
Uh,
it take you before you were conversing in Portuguese with your buddies?
I don't know exactly. I can't measure my competence. At that time, it felt like I was speaking within about 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
And that's average, I think, for a 6 year old.
Right.
And what does a 6 year old do? Uh, he or she is going to learn a very limited vocabulary, but learn how to use that vocabulary to get what she or he what they want, and to do what they want. And that's what I've been doing ever since. From there, I had to learn Spanish and French, and then when I was 19, I suddenly landed a job at the Berlitz School of Languages in Rockefeller Center, New York, because they had just lost their Portuguese teacher, and they had several executives signed up from General Motors for their total immersion course. So they were desperate, and they just grabbed me practically off the street with just 19 years of age, and I loved it. I helped develop their total immersion program. Uh, they launched a school that was specialized exclusively in total immersion on Times Square, and it was great. And the next thing that happened was that since I was out of college teaching at Berlitz, I was going to lose my student draft deferment, which means I would have probably been shipped straight into the DMZ in Vietnam if I didn't do something about it. So I went to my draft board, and they said, well, if you enroll in the Berlitz School as a student, we can give you a student deferment based on that. But you're going to have to study languages full time. I said, well, wait a minute. These are intensive private lessons. You don't do these things full time. So no, you have to study full time. So I was effectively a prisoner in a language school, and I enjoyed every moment of it. And that's where I
Now,
come to.
great. Now, a question. A lot of people say
Hmm.
that you mentioned that you were 6, you learned to speak Portuguese within 3 to 6 months. So
Right.
I had the same experience. We emigrated from Sweden. I have no recollection of having any trouble communicating with my classmates in Montreal in English, like
Hmm.
seamless conversion from Swedish to
Right.
English. So obviously, young kids learn very, very quickly. They're not inhibited. There's a whole bunch of reasons. Question always comes up, do we become less and less capable of learning languages as we get older? And some people think that once you're past the age of 20, you can't learn a language.
Right.
And for some people, 40 is old. For some
Hmm.
people, 60 is old. For us,
Right.
who are in our late 60s, that's not very old at all. So, question, to what extent does age affect our ability to learn languages?
It does have an impact, of course. But the primary factor is not age. The primary factor is the attitude of the student or the psychological hangups that the student develops. And the primary reason the student develops these hangups is not his fault or her fault. It's the method by which he is learning foreign languages. I taught at Berlitz for several years, and every single student began his introduction, his story, his life story about languages by saying what? Guess what every student said the first moment they walked into my class?
It's difficult.
I can't learn languages.
I can't learn languages, yeah.
I've tried. I had this terrible experience, that terrible experience. And my response is, no, you are a natural learner of languages. The problem is that you've been taught with a classic traditional method, which focuses on talking about the language, not in the language, which focuses on grammar and rules, not actually using those rules in practice, and which focuses on translation, which is a total distraction, in my opinion, during the primary learning process. And so I convinced them in practice that it's easy to learn a language. And guess what? Those executives from General Motors who were signing up for those total immersion courses, 50s, 60s, one in his late 70s, they learned to speak Portuguese in 2 weeks. Now, not enough to have a high level conversation about a technical field, but enough to get around and enough to do the same things that you probably did when you were 6 years old in a classroom in Montreal, just to get what you needed and communicate what you needed.
Right. Now, I'm prepared to believe that a 6-year-old learns faster than a 16-year-old. Maybe not.
No, let me just not continue. Necessarily.
And the reason I say that is
they learn differently, but not necessarily faster.
No, and the 16-year-old has different needs and needs a much larger vocabulary and so forth. However, if kids come to Canada or the U.S. as immigrant children, and they're younger than, say, 10, they will probably end up speaking without an accent. If they arrive as teenagers or even people who arrive as adults, it's far less likely that they will end up speaking without an accent. So to that extent, the younger people are more flexible.
When it comes to the phonology and the phonetic mechanisms, and yes, in that sense. But in an intellectual sense, a 16-year-old is more prepared and more disciplined and more able to learn a language more quickly. So there are offsetting factors.
There are offsetting factors.
Let's talk about us.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's face it, our memory isn't, and our memory, long-term memory, the recording of the facts to our memory banks, and then the act of retrieving those files quickly when we need them, is not as strong as it was when we were 20. But we can offset that by learning smart and with technology. Let me explain. Okay? And before we're done here, I want to give you the specific technological tools that I'm talking about right now. First of all, now here that you and I are talking, let's say we're talking in a foreign language that you're teaching me. I need to focus on understanding. I need to focus on communicating. I don't have time to work on remembering or depositing that information to my long-term memory banks, to my hard drive. I need to keep it in active memory, short-term, immediate memory, so I can use it now. All right? If I have to interrupt, say, well, okay, let me try and write this down, or let me try and remember this word, it's going to break up the flow. So the critical thing I need for that function is a recorder. The same kind of recorder you're using to record this video, or strictly an audio recorder. There's one available for the PC for the PCs, and there's one available for the Macs, and they're both free. step number 2, after we have the lesson, I need to be able to focus, zero in on those sentences or those words that I want to record or remember. And so for that, I should use a audio editing program, also available for the Mac, also available for the PC for free, where I can see the pattern of the sounds on my screen. I can just highlight those and press the play button as many times as I want to hear those played back to me. That is not only good for you and me, because our memory storage and memory retrieval is not as efficient as it used to be, but it's also extremely valuable for learners of any age. I'm teaching a young girl in Russia Japanese. She's great, very fast, and she can use the material, what I teach her, almost immediately. But 2 days later, she says she was focused so much on communicating that she forgot what she learned, in our lesson. And so she uses the recording, and the recording is a godsend. I copy it over to Dropbox or any file sharing software on the cloud, and then she just streams it directly to her iPhone or her iPad, and she can listen to it anywhere in the world.
And okay, so we're moving away from the subject of age. So we're saying
this
basically,
is critical. This is critical because if you're older, this is critical for you. And the other side of it, is not just the technology, but the mnemonic devices you can use while you're listening to the new words to make associations. And that also is a great aid for older folks like us, but it's also important for younger folks.
Yeah. I have to say that I share your passion for languages, but I don't agree with what you're saying.
Okay, let's debate.
No, I shouldn't say I don't agree. I agree with some things. I don't agree with other things.
Okay,
yes,
let's focus on what you don't agree with.
No, I think the idea of recording a conversation is a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm not so convinced that we go through this deliberate remembering process. I think that we absorb a lot of information.
Yeah.
Forget it, relearn it, forget it, relearn it. And that process of forgetting and relearning and forgetting and relearning is essentially how we learn.
It's not bad. It's like muscle exercise.
And
you tear muscle and then you rebuild. You tear and you build.
Right. So therefore, I never, for example, if I had one conversation, I have recorded my conversations with my tutors, but I'm never that motivated to listen to it again and again and again. I would rather spend, because I have a limited amount of time to spend on language learning. I would rather expose myself to either a new conversation or I happen to do a lot of listening and reading. Right now I'm following the events in Ukraine, so I'm learning Ukrainian. I want to understand what those politicians are saying. I don't spend a lot of time deliberately trying to learn.
But if you're paying for a big bucks for a lesson with a tutor, right, and you don't have access to all these conversations for free that you're talking about,
right,
and the money is important to you,
right,
then in order to get the best value for your money,
right,
listening to the tutor at least one more time, you double and triple what you absorb from that conversation.
Perhaps. Again, I just think that it certainly has an effect.
Well,
and,
I'll tell you
what we do at Link, for example, we get a written report of all of our mistakes. Sometimes the tutor will actually record it for us. I must admit, I don't necessarily always listen to the recording of the mistakes. Everyone's different. But I do review the mistakes, and I review the words.
I agree with you there.
Yeah.
I don't like re-listening to mistakes. That is very demotivating.
No, that's not the issue at all.
And it's not what you want to listen to. You want to listen to the proper...
I don't listen to mistakes. The tutor writes 10 or 15 or 20 correct phrases and then records them. So he's not recording mistakes. He's recording in Ukrainian or Russian or whatever.
Yeah, but that's canned.
Pardon?
That's canned. when a tutor sits there recording his sentences, that's canned. That begins to sound like language tapes that you buy on the internet or from Berlitz or somebody like that.
Except that they're relevant to me because I remember having made those mistakes.
Oh, okay, good. Okay.
So, except the question of where you want to spend your time. So, I guess my motivation is always to get more and more of the language, more and more experience. I am not so convinced that the deliberate focusing on learning this, on acing this, whether it be the specific thing. See, I think that there are so many, we're going to make so many mistakes. There are so many patterns in the language that we have to master.
Sure. Yeah.
That the opportunity for the teacher to correct my way to fluency is limited. Okay, whereas massive exposure is going to expose me to so many more of these examples of the language.
Here's what's missing from this conversation.
Okay.
It's called the core introduction to the language.
Right.
The oral introduction to the language. In my book, it's a set of maybe 10 to 20
What's the name
hours.
of your book and where do we find it?
Huh?
When you say in my book?
The book that I'm in my book figuratively.
Okay. All right.
And in my book concretely as soon as I write it. Okay.
All right.
But in my approach, there are 10 or 20 core things to build that basic foundation from which you can take off. And when you're focusing on that, you do need to master that as opposed to going off in 10 different directions. And so recording it is very valuable. I'd have to do a sample a lesson with you in a language that you don't know if I can find one to demonstrate for you and for your subscribers exactly how that works.
You know, I agree with you that in every language there are these basic patterns. How people ask questions, how they say things, how they express cause and effect, how they, why, where, when, tenses, whatever. There's certain basic things.
Right.
And when I was learning Romanian, I wrote out about, 300 sentences in maybe 15 or 20 different patterns. And I had a Romanian person translate them and record them for me. And that's how they say things in Romanian. That's how they say this in Romanian. And I listened to it. And it's useful. And it's something that I review from time to time. But I personally have never found that I'm able to sort of nail down this foundation and then build on it. Instead, I find that my ability to understand, remember, use these basic phrases, the foundation, gradually improves over time. Exactly. And that the more exposure I have to the language, the more when I go back to review these, the more sense they make to me.
I agree with you in one point.
Yeah.
When you're starting to learn a language, aiming for perfection in the early stages is very inhibiting. And that's true with any learning, with any subject. It's more of a molding, sculpting process where you start with a blur.
Right.
And then gradually begin to shape that into something that becomes more understandable and clearer. I agree with that.
I agree. I liken it to wandering in a fog. And the fog very slowly dissipates.
Yes.
But it's a very gradual process. Very good.
So there's no one single way,
the
right way of learning languages. Right. Each person is different. You, for example, focus on vocabulary and vocabulary building as a tool.
Right.
As kind of a central axis around which everything else kind of revolves.
Right.
I focus on those original building blocks, core oral foundation. It's 100% oral, very little, perhaps no reading and writing. It's all about one-on-one interaction in real world kind of natural language exchange. And it's so hard to talk about it.
Can I ask you a question?
Next time we meet, let's just do it.
Okay, one question. Getting back
let's
to
just
the
do a 15-minute sample where everyone else can not only that's watching this can not only see what we're doing, but also learn as well.
Okay, but let me ask you a quick question. Getting back to the issue of age. Have you found, when you were a teacher at Berlitz and you've had other experience, you're helping this Russian girl learn Japanese, is there a difference in the ability to learn of a 30-year-old, between a 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old?
They're on average, yes, we're averaging out the experience of many different individuals.
Right.
All right. Yes, generally an older person is slower to record the material, but once they do, they're slower to forget.
Okay, that's interesting.
I remember going back to when I was a 6-year-old. I returned to the United States for a while when I was 9. After less than 3 months, maybe 6 months, I couldn't speak the language anymore.
Right.
Because I was totally disconnected from Portuguese. It was still in my brain.
You were 9 years old?
I came back when I was 9, so I had been there for 3 years.
Right.
And I don't know how long it took. Probably 6 months to a year or 3. I can't remember exactly. But at some point, after I returned to New York, and I was totally disconnected from the language, I could not speak it. It was gone.
Right.
From my active side of my brain. It was still there. So when I returned again at the age of 13, now another 4 years had gone by, it was like walking, and I started hearing the language. It was like walking into a dark room and someone switching the light on, and suddenly it was all back.
Right.
So compare that now to what happens to us. We may be, on average, if we're older, slower to record and remember and really get it, but we're also going to be a lot slower to forget. Mm-hmm. It has something to do, I guess, with the ratio of the passage of time to the amount of time we've already been on the earth. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Maybe. I'm not convinced. I think our neurons stay pretty plastic, and I believe
yours might, because you're in good physical shape, you have good cardiovascular, circulation. Right. All these things are a factor. But on the average, when at Berlitz, the older students it took longer to absorb.
I would imagine that that's the case, but I think it also has to do with flexibility, confidence.
Oh yeah,
lack of inhibitions. So if you have an older person who is confident and not inhibited, I also believe that anyway, we're gonna have another opportunity to talk about this.
I agree with this. It's only one of many factors.
Exactly.
And the other factors can be a lot more important.
There you go. On that point, we will leave agreeing about the importance of passion in learning languages, and that there's more than one way to skin a cat. And it's been a great conversation. So we'll end it here. Otherwise, I suspect we can go on for a couple of hours.
Especially if we go into all the other topics.
Exactly. So,
which we can do some other time.
There you go. Great. So thank you very much, Martin. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Bye for now.